As well as in Paris, we've also heard reaction to this in the last few hours from Baghdad itself and London. Well, now let's head to Washington, where I'm joined by Kelley Vlahos, an anti-war campaigner. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, I see that your website describes this withdrawal as a fake end to Iraq, but we hear that the Iraqi Prime Minister himself is saying it's now a sovereign country. He's right, isn't he?
Well, on paper, it is a sovereign country, and it's in his best interest, as well as President Obama's best interest, to make this a seemingly successful moment in history. But as you said, and as many others have pointed out, that there's a lot of loose ends here, and there's a lot of lack of clarity in terms of what the U.S. combat operation is actually leaving behind and how much work there is yet to do there. It's
leaving behind 50,000 troops who are non-combat troops, so they're in a support capacity. Their presence is justified, is it, from your point of view?
Well, as we've seen in the last several weeks, there is still there's rising levels of violence there as we speak. There's been a wave of attacks by what's being called al-Qaeda remnants, as well as Ba'athist remnants. There is some grumblings coming from the sons of Iraq, the Sunnis that the Americans had paid off to fight in the surge. There's also some rumblings on behalf of the Mahdi army, the remnants there, under a Promised Day brigade, that Muqtada al-Sadr, who is now a kingmaker in Iraq, has promised to activate if the so-called U.S. occupier doesn't get out. So there is a lot of unrest. There's political and physical violence on the horizon that Obama is basically facing as he speaks to the nation, to the U.S. tonight.
So this isn't really the best time for a troop withdrawal. Under those conditions that you just described, would you accept the fact that they do need to keep U.S. troops there?
Well, I'm not a military strategist, but if you talk to the people on the ground in Iraq, there's a lot of mixed feelings about the U.S. leaving. I've seen a number of interviews on the internet, as well as news footage on the television with Iraqis basically saying they're unsure that their security forces will be able to handle the security vacuum that's going to be left when the combat troops leave. But let's be clear here, 50,000 troops will be left behind. They will have combat capacity. General Raymond Odierno, as well as U.S. Ambassador Ryan Crocker, have both made comments in the recent days that those troops will be able to fight if they feel, if necessary. The phrasing of combat troops is easily parsable. They're armed, and they'll be ready to fight if need be. So, like I said, there's a general lack of clarity in terms of what the current policy is there as we speak now.
But there remains a justification for the troops to remain. Of course, it's been a painful transition since Saddam Hussein's dictatorship was ended. Do you agree, then, that actually Operation Iraqi Freedom, as it was called, which is just officially ending today, has set Iraqis on a path to democracy, on a final path, eventually, despite all this painful transition?
Well, I'm not sure about the final path. I see, as anybody who is observing, there have been many bumps along the way, and I'm sure if you've talked about on air already, there is a political impasse right now between the rival factions. There is no working government, in a sense, on paper, and we're going to see a lot of political turbulence in the future weeks and months, maybe even years. So whether or not there is a path, I don't think is important. I think what is important right now is a few things. One, that the U.S. find a way to adhere to the Status of Forces Agreement, which, as we should remember, that is what has prompted the U.S. withdrawal. President Obama will take credit for seeing a campaign promise through and bringing home combat troops. But this is an agreement that was hammered out under the Bush administration with Prime Minister Maliki, that the U.S. withdraw all troops by December 2011. This is just one part of that gradual drawdown. So the U.S. is going to leave. I think what's important is what's left behind and whether or not a political reconciliation can ever come to pass so that there will be safety and rebuilding in that country that has been just unbelievably damaged and destroyed by the last 8 years' war.
Kelley Vlahos, really interesting to hear what you have to say. We appreciate your time joining us there in Washington. Anti-war campaigner Kelley Vlahos, thanks very much indeed.